Hello there, shock horror. I finally got it to work. Yes, I am live. I thought that this was going to be a bust, but apparently we are going to talk about Halloween and Halloween monsters. For those of you who have stuck around and had to put up with having to wait as long as this, I do apologise. I do have a lot of story stuff for you today, and I hope that it was worth your effort hanging around waiting for me to get here. But I am here, so grab some food, some drink, get comfortable, get ready. We are going to go into a lot of detail, and I'm going to give you 4 monsters for today. Things that you can use for your Halloween one-shot. Basically, this is about. That's what I'm doing today. Halloween one-shots. Yes, there will be a Q&A or questions and answers at the end of the live stream for those of you, or presentation. So stick around for that as well. Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. It doesn't necessarily have to be Dungeons & Dragons 5e, because we're going to talk about unkillable Halloween monsters for your Dungeons & Dragons adventures. What sort of thing can you use in your game that will really sort of turn up the heat? It's not just going to be about removing their hit points, because taking out all their hit points isn't going to solve the problem. In fact, that might be almost impossible to do with some of the monsters that I intend to present today. So for those of you who are looking for something like that, I am going to do that. I am going to try to give you some stuff that is very story driven. So there's going to be a lot of elements and aspects to an adventure and the pieces that you can sort of use to build your own story from. Yes, there will be an element of jest on my part, because that tends to be the case with pretty much everything that I do on this channel, but not completely. So there are definitely going to be some elements which are going to be pretty scary, I think, for your players if they're playing through any kind of adventure that you plan to run using these ideas. So the Halloween one-shot Dungeons & Dragons adventure, this is the season, okay? And you need some fearsome creatures, beasts, and monsters. And so I have selected 4 that I think sort of stand out. They're not the norm necessarily that you would use during Halloween. So these are some terrifying, unkillable monsters for your Dungeons & Dragons game. Now, in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, some of these monsters aren't listed as necessarily being unkillable, but they are in fact pretty much unkillable. There are some things you can do, and I'll go into the complications later on. So forget about all of those unusual high-level monsters that you want to incorporate into your Dungeons & Dragons game. Forget about the standard horrors that you're used to. Players have seen ghosts and zombies and werewolves and skeletons and mummies and witches, the vampires, the scarecrows, and the Frankenstein monster. They've seen all of that. So we're going to give them something different, because the thing with Halloween is surprise is a big factor. When you want to scare somebody, you really need to surprise them. So we've got to do something that they won't necessarily be expecting, and still give the clues along the way, because anything that's horror-based or Halloween-based, it generally revolves around a mystery. You're trying to unpack a mystery, that, given the clues that the Dungeon Master is dropping for you. And so that's what we're going to give you today, okay? These monsters will leave at least a lasting impression on your players, I think, given you run them the right way. So the first one is actually I'll tell you which ones I'll tell you all 4 right now. I selected the Banshee. I have selected the Flameskull. I know you'll be a little bit surprised by that. I have also selected the Night Hag. Night Hags are nasty. And I've selected the Revenant, which frankly I think is probably the most frightening of them all. And we'll see how we go in terms of explaining how to work that. So starting off with the Banshee. The Banshee is an undead, or is the undead remnants of a woman or a female elf blessed with great beauty who has failed in life by corrupting or controlling others. And they've withered away and basically became this wraith. Now this is generally the folklore that has been picked up over the years. This is very much going back to Irish folklore, and then Dungeons and Dragons has sort of taken on board that as well. But I would like to point out that the Banshee has also apparently got a different origin story. So the lore behind the Banshee is not clear cut. And so I want to point this out for those of you who want to present the Banshee as a bit of a twist in your story. Because a Banshee can also be a fairy spirit that predicts or warns a family or a person of their coming death. And they will help them through that process. They may not be able to stop it, but it's a warning that it's going to happen. Now, whether you decide that's a warning so that they can stop the death, it's up to you as Dungeon Master. But usually, I think in terms of the fairy, it's not malicious. It's done in the intention that they warn somebody or a family of somebody's death within the group, and then you then have time to prepare before you pass away. Now, would you be able to tie this into any kind of Dungeons and Dragons story? I think I have something for you, and I also have tried to distract the players and present it in your standard way so they get a little bit confused, so they've got a bit of a mystery to unfold. So we're going to start off with an adventure hook. So each of these monsters, I'm going to go through basically the sort of description, what they are. I'm going to give you an adventure hook. I'm going to give you the adventure goal, what the players' characters have actually got to achieve or try to achieve, although that could change. And then the complications with this monster or creature that really make it more difficult than just a hack and slash, because it's not going to be a hack and slash. We're avoiding the hack and slash for Halloween. So if you don't want if you wanted hack and slash, you're in the wrong place for today. So the adventure hook, the first one. There is an old woman in a village who has reported the sound of a screaming woman outside of her house. But she can never find the source or the woman who has been screaming. Every time she leaves the house, looks around her property, she can never find out exactly where it is. And so she's a bit confused. And she's been telling this to the other villagers, and they've kind of got a little bit concerned that maybe she's losing her mind, or maybe there's something going on and she needs help. This is where your party of adventurers come into play, right? So the party will then travel to her house to do some investigation, and you're going to have them find, no perception check involved, okay? We don't want to make it, there's a chance that there's a dice roll involved and they miss this clue. So they're going to find a beautiful gem-covered comb. And they're going to find it on the road, not far from the old lady's house. Now, the reason that I have selected the comb is the comb actually has a lot to do with banshees. For some reason, the lore sort of talks about if you find a comb on the road, don't pick it up because it belongs to the banshee. So we've taken that. Now, for those of you who remember the Lost Mine of Thandalva and Agatha, the banshee in that, one of the things that they have to do is give her a comb to get so that she will actually tell them information. So the comb has a lot of significance for a banshee, which is why we've included it. Now, whether the players realize what's going on and see the significance of this, who knows? This is the point at where they have to do some investigation. So what are our adventure goals? What do they actually have to achieve? I selected two things, thinking pretty much that they don't necessarily have to complete all of them, although sometimes an adventure has multiple parts, and so therefore it's important to have more than one goal rather than just a single goal involved. Particularly if it's not an adventure where you can just fight your way through it. Okay, so sometimes there's more moving parts than normal. So the adventure goal for dealing with the banshee, now they don't know that it's necessarily a banshee. The party must investigate the old lady's property to discover. Now, they probably won't come across a banshee until it's nightfall. That a banshee is actually visiting the house at night in search of something. Now, this is an opportunity for them. Yes, they could get into a fight, but an opportunity to talk to the banshee and try to discern that she's actually looking for a comb that she's lost. Now, the party will have that comb, provided they picked it up off the road. If the party come across it and they didn't pick it up off the road, then hopefully they'll go back and realize where it was and go and get it, because they know where it is. So this particular comb is very important to the banshee, and she wants it back, and she's been looking for it. And that's part of the reason why she's here. It's not the only reason why she's here. So they have to get hold of the lost jeweled comb and must return it to the Banshee for the Banshee to leave. Now, one of the other reasons why the Banshee is here is the old lady has actually come to the end of her life. She is going to pass on to the afterlife very, very shortly. And the Banshee is here to indicate that that's going to take place. But in the process, she lost her comb. So once they complete these tasks, once they've talked to the Banshee, once they've returned the comb, or dealt with it in a different manner, there's other ways you could go about doing this if you wanted to, the Banshee will, of course, leave, and the old lady will pass away in her sleep. It has nothing to do with what the Banshee hasn't killed her or anything like that. It's just been her time. And that'll be the end of your adventure, hopefully. Now, there are complications. Every time you deal with a Banshee, there are things that can happen that make things slightly more difficult than normal, okay? And these are the things I want you to sort of understand. And this is, if you look at the Dungeons & Dragons 5e Monster Manual, and a lot of you will be playing Dungeons & Dragons 5e, you might assume that the Banshee can be killed with magic and mundane weapons, but you would be wrong. Yes, the Banshee can be reduced to 0 hit points and then would sort of cease to exist. But their spirit is tied to a location, and the fact that they can never really be destroyed in that way. So they will return. The same thing would apply if you had if you were playing The Lost Mine of Phandelver, for example, and you're dealing with Agatha. She would return a period of time later if a fight takes place. Usually about 24 hours. It might be a little bit longer. The law sort of says that the only way to really get rid of a Banshee is an exorcism, and some sort of exorcism or a rite performed by a priest or a cleric to have the spirit leave the location or stop interfering with the living, basically. This is to actually get rid of the Banshee permanently. It's not a complicated process. It can be done very quickly. All it would take for them to do is go and see the cleric or the priest in the village, if one of them aren't capable of doing it themselves, and perform an exorcism. So it isn't actually that difficult to get rid of her, but you're not really going to be killing her as such, not in that sense. Now, for those of you who are thinking, well, the Banshee's a curse, isn't it? Yes, it is a curse. But here's the thing. A Banshee curse can't be broken, as only the spirit can remove its own curse, unfortunately. Now, if you're thinking back to sort of the Dungeons & Dragons Banshee, where it is a spirit that has fallen by its own fault in life and become this thing, it is probably not redeemable. But if we're talking about something like the fairy Banshee, okay, the fairy spirit, then there's no curse involved. It is just a fairy spirit as such. Does that make sense? I think I've given you all the pieces. It is actually a very, very simple story. Whether it would apply to your group is another thing. You may want to change it up, and I suggest you change it as much as you like. You don't have to use it as is. Okay, this takes pretty much all of the tropes from lore for the Banshee and tries to put it all in one. Okay, next. The Flameskull. Things get progressively more appalling, by the way, for those of you who are wondering. The Flameskull. The Flameskull is an intelligent undead fashioned from the remains of a dead wizard that retains their magical spellcasting powers. They're usually all covered in flame. They float around, they can move, they can fly, they can hover, they can do that sort of stuff, and then they can also cast spells, and pretty powerful spells at that. Fireball is probably one of the worst that they can unload, and they can make a mess of you pretty quickly. But that's not the only thing, because they use a lot of fire, rays, and so forth. So Flameskulls are created to protect hidden treasure hoards or secret chambers or specific individuals by dark spellcasters. Somebody who is a spellcaster is usually required to actually create these things. So there's a ritual that needs to be performed to make it happen. I've kept the adventure hook for this really simple, so it's not complicated, so it shouldn't be too hard for players to understand what they need to do next. So the recently dead in a local town, or all of the there's a local wizard, or all the wizard bodies that have been buried in a cemetery in this local town have been dug up. So I've given you two possibilities. You can go with the local wizard has just recently died and been buried, and then somebody's dug up the body. Or you can say that the cemetery had a number of wizards that were buried in the cemetery, and all of their bodies have been dug up. The bodies still remain, but the heads have been removed, and they're missing. So this is the mystery that they have to figure out. So the adventure goal for the party is they must investigate this morbid event to discover that there is an evil witch who is transforming the wizard's skulls into flaming skulls. Now, why is she doing this? Once they've found all the clues that would sort of help them find out, okay, this is what's going on, we need to deal with this witch, the witch intends to destroy the people who have banished her from the small village. So for whatever reason, you can decide what it is. She's been driven out. Maybe they just don't like witches. Maybe she's done something specific. Maybe she hasn't. But in any case, she's decided that she's going to take over the village, take control of it, and probably try to destroy the vast majority of the population of this village. And she's doing that with Flameskulls, and it would definitely be more than capable of doing that. Now, the weak point here is the witch. The witch is probably not going to be able to hold up to much. But just because you destroy the witch does not mean that the Flameskull, and you don't need to use probably more than one. If you play this at low level, and level 1 or 2 characters in a Flameskull, it's a pretty hard battle. Even level 3 characters will probably struggle to a certain degree. So I'm not going to set the level for this adventure, okay? I expect there will be a battle involved with the Flameskull. So even if they deal with the witch, what you're probably going to find is that the Flameskull is going to be their biggest problem. Because once the witch is dead and is no longer controlling the Flameskull becomes independent and it just does its own thing, which is a frightening thought, because now who knows what it might get up to. So given that, and that part of the story, what are the complications with dealing with a Flameskull? Well, one, it is very hard to get near them because they have a lot of ranged attacks and they have the fireball spell that they can cast. So Flameskulls are hard to kill because they rejuvenate after about 1 hour if destroyed. So if you reduce them to 0 hit points, they are essentially killed, but not permanently. You have to instead have holy water sprinkle over the remains of the skull to stop it from reforming again. Otherwise, it just comes back. So this is why I consider it an unkillable monster. There is another way that you can deal with the Flameskull, and if you're dealing with new players, they won't necessarily know this information. So by all means, maybe a knowledge check would be appropriate. If you're dealing with experienced players, they will probably already know exactly everything there is to know about the Flameskull. So you might want to change a few things up. But I don't think that that's necessarily that important. I think the mystery is what's important. Remember, the encounter with the monster is not what creates the horror. It's the threat of the unknown. Okay, it's the mystery leading up to the final confrontation. So another way of getting rid of the Flameskull is to use the remove curse or dispel magic spells, and you cast that on the Flameskull permanently to lay it to rest. And the time in which you do so is usually when it's been reduced to 0 hit points. So you don't want to do that after, once it's reformed, because it's not going to work. You need to destroy the thing and then use remove curse or dispel magic. Now, if you don't have somebody in your party with any of these spells, or nobody has any holy water, then I would suggest making sure there's a way of going and getting holy water from the local church or from a local store or a merchant or something like that. If they don't actually have those spells available to them, then I would make sure there's an NPC they can go and negotiate with to actually get them to use the spell on it and get rid of the Flameskull completely. Now, the true risk is if they botch things up really badly, there's the potential for there to be more than one flaming skull. And we don't want that. And the players certainly don't want that, because that will cause a lot of trouble. So that's my story for the Flameskull. For if anybody who's ever sort of wondered, how would you build a story just around a Flameskull, I think that's the story to use. Okay, next, the Night Hag, one of my favourite monsters because it's such a pain. Here we go. So the Night Hag are fiendish nightmares. They trade evil souls to demons and devils to ensure that the blood war never ends. So the battle between the Nine Hells and the Abyss, between the demons and devils, is really fueled and perpetuated by the hags, and Night Hags in particular, because they're really effective at actually getting souls. They have this bag that they put their souls into. But they can only put evil souls in there. So they have to actually find people who are already evil and then take their soul. And there's a way of going about doing that. Or there's the opportunity to turn people who are good into evil people and then take their soul from them. So there are a couple of different ways you can look at this. But I'm going from a different perspective. I've gone very Hansel and Gretel in terms of this. And if anybody here who's sort of run through the Curse of Strahd, you'll pick up on a lot of the markers for this particular idea. Here we go. So the adventure hook is a small isolated town. Yet again, we've got lots of small isolated towns. Don't stick it in a city. Too much going on. Make it so it's isolated away from everything. So this town has children and babies going missing. They are disappearing for whatever reason. And of course, the paranoia, hysteria around that would be quite intense. And the party are called on to actually assist in the situation. Find out what's happening to the children. Find out what's happened to all these babies that have gone missing. Somebody's taking them. Okay? They can't be just all running away. So that's your first hook. Now, there's another hook that I want you to present. This gives them a little bit more information so they can kind of piece things together and sort of work out what's going on. Yep. So we need to give them some sort of foreshadowing, some sort of clue. It's not necessarily giving them the answer because they're not necessarily going to figure out exactly what's going on. So while this is happening, they also find out that an unusual number of people have passed away in their sleep recently, while children and babies have been going missing. Now, we're not going to spell out, you're not going to give away that, these individuals were evil, or these people were the ones that were quite nasty in the town, that there was something wrong with them, or anything like that. You don't want to give away that, because that's not necessarily going to be something that people sort of translate and say, oh, Dada passed away, they were evil. That must be the reason why. Do you know what I mean? They're not going to necessarily tie that as a connection. It is just a hint. The other thing that you want to drop is information they can collect along the way as part of your adventure hook, and that is that people within the town have been reporting dreadful nightmares. A lot of people have been having sleepless nights. Not all at once, but there have been individuals who have had some terrible nightmares and they've been reporting that. And a lot of the townsfolk have been experiencing that over a period of time. So those are our hooking information that we're going to use. So what's our adventure goal for this? So the party needs to investigate the reason for the children's abductions, why the locals are having nightmares, and why there's an increased mortality rate within the township. So there's 3 different things to investigate, to figure out. Now, because there's 3 different things to investigate, but they all lead to the one factor, which is there's a Night Hag involved, we should be able to get them to the correct answer, or at least they should find their way to where they need to be eventually. So their purpose in terms of the goal is to stop the Night Hag stealing children, stop the Night Hag from killing the children, grinding up their bodies, and making the children into meat pies that she then sells in another guise to the townsfolk. A pretty horrible thing to do. Yep. And a technique and tactic that you would use if you wanted to sort of inadvertently trick people into doing something evil. although this is probably not going to do this. This is just a sick way of entertaining the Night Hag, which is what they are unfortunately prone to doing. Now, for anybody who's played through the Curse of Strahd, you will immediately notice this is the story around the bone grinder, the windmill. The only difference is I've plucked it, pulled it, and added a bit more to it. Now, there's another thing, and there's another goal for this adventure that I've added in, and that is part of the party's tasks is to, once they find the Night Hag, find out what's going on, there's an opportunity to rescue the children, hopefully, that are still alive and haven't been killed and turned into pies. The players will probably be absolutely furious, because I've found that this tends to be the case. As soon as you start doing something as dark and horrible as this, then they really lose it, which is great, because it means they will definitely go after the Night Hag. But part of their task is to rescue a human baby that will be devoured by the Night Hag, and then will give birth to a new Night Hag. Now, the last thing you need is more of them around. So this is part of their task, to make sure that doesn't happen. So there's quite a lot going on here. There's quite a few different things, a lot of moving parts to deal with, but there's complications to dealing with any kind of Night Hag. And there are 3 that I want to point out. Pardon me. First one is, a Night Hag never needs to fight anything. They can enter the ethereal plane if attacked. So if a battle takes place with the party and they're not able to take her down in the first round before she can simply move to the ethereal plane, then combat with her is pretty much pointless, because they probably can't attack her once she does that. Most of them won't be able to move to the ethereal plane to do so. Okay, so that's the big problem with a Night Hag, is their ability to shift from the material plane to the ethereal plane. And once they do that, you can't really get at them. And I would suggest to you, for anybody who's wondering how to run a Night Hag, in a way that's actually going to work, don't have them fight an entire party. That's not how they fight. They are much more insidious, and I'll explain how you go about doing this. Night Hags project nightmares into their victims' minds while they're in the ethereal plane, and they straddle the creature, and then they drain the life from the creature while it's still sleeping, till they're dead. Now, it is very, very easy to do this every night, to come back, and slowly but surely, if the players are actually trying to take out the Night Hag can attack them this way. So there's really some big questions about, okay, if the Night Hag is going to do all of her worst things while she's in the ethereal plane, we need to have a way of finding her. So either you need to be able to pass into the ethereal plane to find her, or you need to be able to see her while she's in the ethereal plane so that you can then affect her. Does that make sense? So something like the ability to see into the ethereal plane, there's a couple of things that allow you to do that. Some class features sort of do something like that. And then there's the true seeing spell. And I would make sure as a dungeon master that you make that available, because that's really the only way you're going to catch that hag and then be able to dispose of it. Otherwise, it's like trying to catch a unicorn. A unicorn's supposed to be like uncatchable, right? Maybe not in Dungeons and Dragons, but they are supposed to be uncatchable. Well, a Night Hag is essentially the same sort of thing. They are uncatchable, but on the other end of the spectrum. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So that's my Night Hag story for you. And I've saved what I think is absolutely the simplest way to approach a Revenant. The easiest and simplest way. It is probably going to be full of battles and combat, and it is probably going to be, I can only sort of describe it as being like the original Terminator movie. For anybody who remembers Arnold Schwarzenegger and James Cameron's movie, The Terminator, I think this is where the Revenant really shines. And so that is the story we're going to present. I'm going to give you 2, so you can pick about sort of which story you want to pursue. So it's not actually that involved. We'll be all right, don't you worry. So the Revenant is an intelligent, unstoppable spirit driven by revenge against somebody who has wrongfully betrayed them, or betrayed them while they were alive, and it resulted in their death. And so they are the spirit of vengeance, and that spirit or soul passes into, it'll start off in their original corpse, provided their corpse is still functional. Otherwise, it will then move to another corpse until it has fulfilled its task, and that is take them out. So the Revenant soul returns to the living world to possess a corpse as many times as it takes to exact its revenge on the living nemesis. So we need a target for this thing. And I have decided that the player's characters could easily be a target in this case. So the first adventure hook. One or all of the player's characters have wrongfully or wronged an NPC in your game by killing them and looting their body, resulting in the party being haunted by a Revenant. And this Revenant just keeps pursuing them over and over again. My suggestion is do not make your party too high a level if you're playing Dungeons & Dragons 5e. If you're playing earlier versions of the game, you'll know fully well that you don't need to really worry about it being difficult, because it's definitely going to be difficult. I'm not going to give you recommendations about how to do that. You'll understand that the older Revenant was pretty nasty compared to a 5e Revenant. So this is the first hook that you could use. It is actually very easy to use because players are prone to this sort of behavior, particularly if they like hack and slash, and Dungeons and Dragons tends to be kill monsters and take their stuff. So you could easily build this into anything. You could probably even build it into your existing campaign, and it wouldn't really matter what level they are. Does that make sense? Because you can increase the number of Revenants if you feel like you need to have more. But I think one is probably enough, provided you're relatively low level. Now, there's another adventure hook that you could use, which adds a bit more of a mystery for them to discover, which you might be more interested in, and that is the party is assigned to protect an NPC or non-player character, a nobleman or a noblewoman or a lord who is being pursued by an assassin that never seems to be able to die. All attempts to try to kill this assassin that keeps pursuing them has failed. They've taken out this assassin that's trying to take out this lord multiple times, and they just can't seem to stop them. So what is the goal for this adventure? Well, if you're dealing with the first adventure hook where the Revenant is pursuing the party members specifically, or one of the party members, then they need to either stop or appease this Revenant's blood path, which is leading to them, and its intention to kill either the party or one of the party members. So that they've got to try and stop that or appease it. There's a couple of different ways we can go about doing that. That'll be in the complications section, okay? I'll go and I'll discuss it in the complications for the Revenant rather than in this section. Now, if you're dealing with protecting somebody else, like an NPC, a lord, a noblewoman or whatever, from an assassin that never seems to stop pursuing them and never seems to be able to be killed, you need to find out, why is this Revenant actually hunting down the NPC or lord? And then you need to find a way of rectifying the betrayal. Now, there's a lot of different ways that might take place, and I'm going to go to the complications section because that'll help unwind it for you, okay? So the only way to permanently destroy a Revenant is for a year and a day to pass. Because a Revenant has only 1 year to fulfill its goal, and exact its revenge, otherwise it ceases to exist. And so what we're going to do is, this is not really an option for a one-shot Halloween adventure. So although we're aware of it, unless you are fast-forwarding the story to the sort of, last day of that year, where it's sort of like a time factor thing coming in place, where they only have to worry about surviving those first 24 hours, the last 24 hours before the Revenant will cease to exist. You could play it out that way. I'm only suggesting it because it's sort of part and parcel of that. There's another way of dealing with this, and that is you could use the wish spell while the Revenant has no body, and send the soul to the afterlife. And so you wish away the Revenant, basically. Now, your players are probably not going to have access to the wish spell. So although I've put it out there, it means that probably somebody else is going to have to cast it for them if you're going to use this as an opportunity or a solution. I'm going to suggest that I would suggest to you and recommend to you that you avoid using the wish spell as a way of getting rid of the Revenant. Yeah, unless your players are playing at a very high level, they won't have access to it. And a Revenant against characters that are high enough level to cast wish already, the Revenant will just be a nuisance rather than scary. It will just be a nuisance. So I don't recommend that one particularly. It's the last two. The last two are the important ones. Here we go. So the player's characters could let the Revenant complete its goal, so it is laid to rest. Now there's a couple of ways you could see this. There's two different stories we're talking about, two different story hooks. Now if we allow the Revenant to, if it's only one party member who has wronged this soul, then your group could just let the Revenant kill that party member and then have them raised from the dead or revivified or use something like reincarnate to bring them back later on. Probably maybe not revivify, because revivify is quite quick, and maybe that's not going to be the one that you want to go for. So that would actually be a way of getting out of that problem. Now, if the Revenant is going after the whole party, this is probably not going to be the solution for you, to let the Revenant actually kill the individual they are pursuing. Now, the other thing is, you may decide, if you find out why the NPC or Lord is actually being pursued by the Revenant, that the Revenant has a very good reason. And therefore, once they find out the mystery, and I would suggest to you giving the NPC or Lord a secret, a dark secret, that they've done something horribly, terribly wrong, and this is why this Revenant is pursuing them. And so the party's actually probably, it would be quite legitimate to let the Revenant complete its task. I know that sounds terrible, but it won't be obvious straight away, not until they've done a bit of investigation and found out the truth behind why the Revenant is pursuing the NPC or Lord. So letting it complete its task. I know that sounds like a strange way to end a story, but bear with me, I have a bit more. There's another way to deal with a Revenant, and that is to rectify the betrayal in some way. Now, how do you do that? I think you'll find probably the only way to actually stop the Revenant from pursuing either the NPC or the Lord or the player's characters is to restore the Revenant to life. This might actually work, because if whatever wrong has been imposed on them that resulted in their death is rectified and they are brought back to life so they can continue their life, they're no longer a Revenant. Does that seem strange to you? Did anybody see that coming? So that means something like raise dead and reincarnate. They're the only spells that I can think of that are relatively lowish level. The player's characters don't have to be the one who actually casts that spell. It could be an NPC, priest or cleric or whatever you want, or a druid that they interact with in the story. But that would be a way of actually rectifying the problem. One way of rectifying the problem, and maybe the bill is paid by the NPC or Lord if they are the one who wronged that individual who became the Revenant. In the case of if the party members are responsible for the Revenant existing, then they'll pay that bill. They'll be the one that have to fork out the cost of paying for that service. Those are really the only ways to deal with a Revenant, because killing a Revenant and reducing it to 0 hit points doesn't stop it. And when I was thinking about this and how you would deal with a Revenant in an interesting way, one of the things I noticed, because I've used a Revenant before, is that they create panic and they create a timer because they're constantly being pursued. And if the players are trying to achieve something else, in the Curse of Strahd, as soon as I had Revenants chasing them, They could not sit around and have long rests and short rests because they didn't know how long they had before the Revenant would show up again. And for those of you who are aware of the how the 5e Revenant works, 24 hours and then it finds another body and it comes back. And then it doesn't need to sleep. It doesn't need to eat. It's never going to stop. It is just going to come after you over and over again. It's very much the Terminator Cyborg story, the original one, not the other ones. And so it has a lot of that kind of feel. And the original Terminator movie was a horror story. There's a lot of action. It's a horror story. For those of you who are wondering why all the other ones never worked very well, it's because they really weren't horror stories. And then Ghost Rider is sort of another example of a Revenant, for those of you who are wondering where sort of, you draw it from. Now, I'm hoping this was useful to you in some way for your Dungeons & Dragons game, and that you will have as much fun as I've had in trying to come up with these. So, thank you for showing up. Thank you for hanging around. If you like this, I have hundreds of videos for players and Dungeon Masters covering every aspect of Dungeons & Dragons. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing video content like this, you can through Patreon, the Amazon affiliate links down in the description, the merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos, or just watch my videos. Do the usual YouTube things. You know what I'm talking about, right? Share, like, and subscribe, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Yeah, make sure to hit the bell button because I go live every week and you want to be notified if you can. And I do produce edited videos as well. And so notifications will help in actually seeing those pop up. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. And we're there. We got through it. I know there's a lot of material. I know I said a lot of stuff today, people. But when you start trying to break down even three or four short stories, it takes a bit of time. All right, so hashtag, it's questions and answers time before I have to go. Where are we? Here, there, that's it, there. I will answer questions about anything you like, as long as it's related to Dungeons & Dragons, and Halloween, and stuff like that, and role-play games. Yeah. Okay, are my eyes any good today, or are they all ballsed up? I do apologise for anybody who had to hang around and wait a long time to actually have this live stream actually sort of start. Windows is a pain in the butt, and I did do all the prep I could to make sure I didn't have this problem, and it still happened. And it's annoying. If it's annoying for you, trust me, it's even more annoying for me, because I've had it happen so many times. It happens when you live stream a lot. You just can't get away from it, unfortunately. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yes, I am still sick. We won't go into that. PB Preston. So I think we all know the real unkillable monster is Windows. Yes, it is. That's right. Windows. You know, those things with glass in them? That's not actually the Windows I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. Justin. Hello, Justin. How's it going? Brian is here. Hello. Byron Lee is here. The kind of monster that seems unkillable, the demi-lich. Yeah, look, I could have talked about liches and so forth, but I feel like a lich is for higher level play. And if you're going to play a one-shot, the problem with higher level play is it's not that scary. High level play, it sort of sucks. And there's the tendency to sort of rely on combat. You'll notice why a lot of what I present to you is not actually focusing on combat. The solution to dealing with the problem is actually quite often got nothing to do with having a battle. The solution has very much to do with knowing how to deal with the situation. Does that make sense? So in other words, even if you have a battle, there's something else you have to do to achieve success. And there's a few things you need to do. There's a lot of investigation and mystery required. If you think about Jaws and Spielberg's movie Jaws, you knew that there was a shark. You didn't know there was a shark initially, but you knew there was probably a shark. You never saw the shark. You had to investigate and figure out what was going on. The best horror stories are the ones that are part mystery, and so that's why I sort of presented it that way. Specifically, a Sirac from Tome of Horrors. Your thoughts on... Okay, so... Yeah, look, a Sirac is essentially the unkillable demi-lich, because nobody's ever going to be able to figure out where the phylactery is. That is the problem with a Sirac, is that he's figured out a way to hide his phylactery in such a way that you cannot get to him. And still draw energy from that, which is a frightening thought, because what if somebody else figures that out? A Sirac has never been interested in being a god, that's my understanding, but has certainly been interested in creating evil gods and interfering with the cosmos in many ways. So I don't feel like the Tomb of Horrors is a good Halloween adventure. The reason being is it is a thinking person's game. That adventure is a thinking person's adventure. It takes a lot of time. It would be hard to actually role play out and actually get through, because you have to be so careful with everything. And true horror should certainly not remove death for your player characters, but having your characters die is not necessarily the true horror. You know, the true horror for some of the things that you realize here is the true horror is children being stolen for the Hag one, and then being ground up into pies. And that's appalling. Or a baby being devoured. That's the true horror. Not the Hag itself. It's what it's doing that's the horror. And then when you think about the Flameskull, the true horror is not the Flameskull itself. The true horror is whatever the villagers did to the witch, whether it be legitimate or not legitimate. It would be much more interesting if the villagers have wronged the witch in a way that was totally unfair and unreasonable. That would be the true horror. Do you know what I mean? The twist in the true horror is not necessarily the monster itself. The true horror in the Frankenstein story. The true horror is not the Frankenstein monster, it's Dr. Frankenstein. Does that make sense? I hope I got it clear. Anyway, let's work our way through the chat before I have to go. Next two is here. And I know somebody's going to ask me about Castle Ravenloft. I'll answer that very briefly. Don't you worry before I leave. Jim, how's it going, Jim? As always, worth waiting for your vids. I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad you hung around and you enjoyed it. That's good. Jasper, hello, Jasper. I'm throwing my first Halloween party. Oh, good. Oh, right. Have fun. Halloween is not something that I generally celebrate in New Zealand. It's not really a holiday or a thing that we do in New Zealand. It's very American in terms of, as far as I'm concerned. But I understand that there is a tendency around this time to sort of look at how to do something special around this time of the year. So I wanted to give you something that would work. And I had a look at everybody else's videos on Halloween, and I was like, I think I can do a little bit better. Maybe I can do a little bit better. Hello, Stephanie. How's it going? I'm glad you enjoyed the video. I don't have any questions so far, so it looks like I could easily wind up disappearing very, very quickly. Brian, lots of good ideas. Yes, good, as usual, always. I'm glad you enjoyed catching the live stream, mate. Thank you for showing up. All right, who else we got here? TD Gaming Deluxe. Do you have Curse of Strahd Legendary Edition? No, I don't. I have the original Curse of Strahd book they put out. I don't really see that there's much point in getting the Legendary Edition myself. They made a few corrections and adjustments. Corrections are fine. Adjustments, I don't really like the idea of removing some of the aspects to the original adventure myself, just because of the prevailing political and climate of social media and popular discussions on the internet and around the world. I try very much to ignore all of that nonsense myself, and being a person who works with, I live in a socialist country. We look after each other, and it's a social welfare system. There's a social welfare system. It's very tied into that, and then how I myself sort of operate. So I don't like the idea of that particular Curse of Strahd. But if it appeals to you, that's cool. That's fine. Hello, Justin. Yeah, Windows does suck. Absolutely. Okay, so before I disappear, before I have to go, I suppose I should talk about the elephant in the room. It's a big elephant. And the elephant is not your monster manual. I mean, there's plenty of monsters in the monster manual that you could use for Halloween. Let's talk about the Curse of Strahd, because I know somebody's going to say, well, what if I want to run the Curse of Strahd as a one-shot Halloween adventure? I will probably talk about how to do something like that in the future, but for those of you who are still here, I'm going to explain to you what you could do with the Curse of Strahd or the original Ravenloft adventure to make it sort of all work. And that is, you start off your hook like you always do, is the players are invited to dinner at Castle Ravenloft. And that's where you start. That's your hook. Okay? They get a letter. They are asked to come and meet in the castle. And it starts off with a dinner. Now, it doesn't matter whether you have 2 hours, 3 hours, or 4 hours to run your adventure. The whole thing is going to be wrapped up in that session. Does that make sense? No matter what, it's all going to be wrapped up. The players can go anywhere in Castle Ravenloft. If you're running the Curse of Strahd, I would ditch everything else. Nothing else matters. Okay? The only thing that matters is the castle and that dinner party. Now, if you have any understanding about how to run the Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft and the Ravenloft Castle, is their first interaction or dinner party with Strahd is actually an illusion. And he goes to great lengths to hide his presence because he's pulling the strings from a distance. So they can't just metagame and say, oh, we'll just attack Strahd straight away. I wouldn't actually even start this adventure as characters at level 1 or 2 or 3. The original adventure was actually targeted for level 5 to 7, I believe. And so I would start your characters off where they jump to the next power level, which is either 4 or 5. I would start them there. So they go through the dinner party. They may discover that there's trickery at place. They may be invited to stay the night in the castle. They may explore the castle. But leaving the castle, as the adventure already stipulates, if they do so, bad things happen. Okay, the statues that are at the front entrance will attack them. As they explore the castle, when you reach the last hour of your session, this is where everything has to happen. This is where Strahd needs to show up and present his worst face. Does that make sense? I would suggest that's the way to go, because an hour is enough to deal with a battle with Strahd. Yes, he could have some minions with him, whether that be zombies or skeletons or whatever else, or somebody else, maybe the butler. It's up to you. And you will have finished that. Now, once he's defeated, they then have to rush through the castle to find his crypt and dispose of him permanently. But there's a time factor here, because you've only got that much time. So in real time, they've got whatever time is left in that hour. So once they've, if they defeat Strahd and don't get wiped out, they've still got to find his coffin and then stake him while he's still paralyzed and unable to do anything. And if the real time runs out, then in game time, that's the time frame for your the exploration of the castle itself. Does that make sense? So real time, it might be only 30 minutes to find the crypt and his coffin, or it might be 15 minutes. They're going to have to work fast and hard to get there, and they may well be unsuccessful. So that's how I would suggest you do a Castle Ravenloft one shot for Halloween, for anybody who is wondering how to make that work. Now, have I done it myself? No, but I've talked to a lot of people who say it works really, really well. It's also how I believe Margaret, who is very much responsible for the character that Strahd, runs her... Did I just get disconnected? Disconnected? OBS reconnected successfully. Okay. All right. There was a little bit of a hiccup there along the way, but apparently OBS is reconnected. This is what happens when you have a Windows update and it messes with all of your settings. So Shrek, hello, how's it going? Happy to catch one of your live streams. I'm glad you can make it. So, yeah, go and check them out sometime. Oh, man. Danny Atkins, how's it going? How would you run a game Asmodeus and Grizel from an alliance? I probably wouldn't. I don't know how I would go about doing that. For me, Danny, it's probably not something that I would consider. I have used Asmodeus in my games before. I just don't think that I would include two big heavy lifters all at once. Unless if you're playing a really high-level game, then absolutely, then I would understand why you have selected two big hitters. But for me, I don't want to draw too much attention away from either one of them. So therefore, I would be inclined to simply go with dealing with one rather than both. I don't know what level you're playing at, Danny. Does that make sense? So yeah, I wouldn't really deal with Asmodeus and Grisette forming an alliance in a game, because I don't think it's an alliance that would last very long. I don't think that they would do it. But it's not my game, it's yours. So you've got to come up with that rationale, unfortunately. Christine's Epic Adventure, yet another YouTuber. For those of you who are unaware, Christine does a lot of stuff, and you should definitely go and check her out. Oh, I am about to have connection problems. I can see it right now. Is YouTube going to bundle me up? Where are we? Are we not responding? We are not responding. Okay. Well, OBS is still going, so hopefully it's working. I can't see the chat right now, so I am now waiting for it to catch up on my computer. Man, I really do despise YouTube and Windows updates. Windows updates are really my biggest issue right now. Such a pain. Okay, so hopefully people are still with me. So Christine, you love the ideas, Cursed Strahd ideas? Well, good. Yep. Will I be trying to do something like this with my group? It really depends on them. I'm not actually the dungeon master for my home group right now. I'm a player. I'm going to get to play a scribe wizard, Order of the Scribe. Now, for anybody who thinks that the Order of the Scribe is not that good, I'm going to prove people wrong. Don't you worry. So stand by for future content once I figure out how to abuse it and exploit it in the most horrible way for players who want to do that, and for dungeon masters who think they probably should ban it from their game. I will have all of the juicy stuff once I get to test it out myself. Okay. Okay. So Shrek, what do you got here? I've run Curse of Strahd 3 times now and really enjoy role-playing as Strahd and using him pulling the strings, like you said. Yeah, you're not really going to have an opportunity to pull the players and characters' strings very much in a one-shot. But if you're wanting to use it as a one-shot, you could do it. It can be done. Okay, I think that the whole thing here on YouTube is about to fall apart. So since I can't see anything else coming through, I will do a refresh of my page. And if it refreshes and there's any more comments, then I will respond to them. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that do have a Dungeon Master roundtable very shortly anyway, so I suppose I should be getting organised for that. The other thing is next week. What am I talking about next week? Next week is a player video and a Dungeon Master video. So it'll be focusing on all of that. What does that mean? Essentially, that means that I am going to cover the forgery kit. I believe that is my intention, is to cover the forgery kit and give you a whole lot of information that will be useful for actually dealing with that. And I think this is where we sign off for today, before anything can get any more complicated, because right now YouTube is not coping with the fact that my stream is coming apart. So thank you for showing up to my live stream. Thank you to my patrons for supporting me. Thank you for supporting me by watching such long form content, which I know a lot of people struggle with. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the wee early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.